It was not a long walk to the church. It was located on Steesley itself, barely a quarter-mile from the house. Why I was going there, of all places, I didn't know. If Timothy had stayed an extra minute, I might have asked. Go straight to the church, Lisbette, I said, making my voice low like Timothy's. Do exactly what I say and don't ask questions. Oh, and by the way, I don't want to marry you. I'll kiss you, but I won't marry you. I stopped to pick up a rock and throw it hard against a tree. Obviously, in the past 6 years, Timothy had had time to perfect his technique. Of course, he'd only been 15 back then on that day in the barn, and at 13 I wasn't exactly well practiced either. I stopped again. The first one, that's what he was talking about, our first kiss. I slapped my forehead. But what did he mean when he wanted to know if it was better? Did that mean he wanted it to be better, or did it mean he only wanted it to be better for me so that I'd be sorry that I didn't want to marry him? Confused, I made myself walk again. A few minutes later, the trees stopped, penned back by a lone stone wall. On the other side of the wall were the new church grounds. I caught my breath. Under the moon, the long grass stretched before me like a sheet of pale silk. The edges of the chapel glowed gently as if the stones themselves were lit from within. Beside the chapel, the old willow tree bent over the shining tributary from the Daub River, the branches dipping like long fingers into the water. In all my life, I'd never seen the church appear so beautiful. I climbed over the wall but hesitated to go further. Once I left the trees, I was vulnerable to anyone who might be watching. But time was short, and I needed to get the seal somewhere safe. There was only one thing to do, and that was to take the field at a run. I gripped the seal in my hand and pushed off the wall and started across the open grass. Maybe it was the moonlight, maybe it was the kiss, maybe it was the fact that at any moment it could all crumble and disappear. But whatever it was, it filled me with an energy I hadn't felt since I was a child. It electrified me. I was breathing in the air with great gulps, laughing randomly. Oh, why did we have taxes, contracts, and seals? Why couldn't we sleep the whole day long and only come out with the moon? At the churchyard gate, I skidded to a halt and gripped the iron bars with my free hand. I was breathing so hard my head was spinning. It felt entirely irreverent, feeling so recklessly free on such hallowed ground, and I was in the middle of scolding my happy senses when a movement caught my eye. I dropped the seal and it promptly crashed into my shin again. I choked on a whimper. From under the willow leaves beside the church, a figure appeared. You seem to be drawn to churches. I squinted through the iron bars. George? He walked out of his hiding place and crossed the yard to the gate. From the opposite side of the gate, he fixed his eyes on me. Perhaps you were right about the moonlight. There is something irresistible about it. I took a step backwards. There was something in George's eye that dampened the joy of the previous moments. I licked my lips. Have you found the boys? He lifted the latch and opened the gate. I didn't go looking for the boys. I went looking for you. I thought I'd see you lurking down the road, but I never expected to see you running straight towards me. Why not? I have nothing to be afraid of, I said, but the sound of my voice betrayed me. He was on my side of the gate now, moving towards me. I know you're looking for Timothy. Maybe you're in love with him, and maybe you're not. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a letter. I found this in your room. The seal hadn't been broken, but after reading it, I gathered that you two had been communicating somehow. And by the sound of this letter, he wants to tell you something very important at the ball tomorrow. Is that why you're out here? To warn him to stay away from his father's house? I focused on the letter in his hand and tried to reach for it. He lifted it over his head and away from my grasp. I think I'll keep it for now. But that's not mine. It belongs to... He tucked the letter back into his pocket and kept talking. Maybe you think I'm the bad guy in all of this. Maybe Timothy's convinced you that he's doing the country a favor somehow. Lisbette, he said as his hands rested on my shoulders, I'm not the bad guy. Whatever Timothy has told you, he's lying. His hands slid around to my back. I started to step back again, but he didn't let go. He was holding me tightly in his arms now. Timothy hasn't told me anything, I said, putting my hands up between us. I don't even know where he is. But you're worried about him, aren't you? He said, smoothing the hair away from my face. Of course, I said, keeping my hands rigidly on his chest. We've always been friends. I admire loyalty, he said, his eyes fixed on my lips. But in some cases, it can be misplaced. He leaned nearer to me. I turned my head. Let me go. Just convince me, he said, hotly into my ear, that you're not in love with Timothy. I began to push. Stop it! Lisbette, you're so beautiful. His mouth came down on mine, but I twisted free. Stop it! Let me go! A figure came flying from the graveyard, a large stick raised high in the air. Get away from her! George released me and swung around just in time to block the blow from a still very muddy teenage boy. George got it hard in the arm, but that was Henry's last successful strike before the stick was wrenched from his hands. Taking Henry by the hair, George raised the stick, poised to strike. Daryl, wasn't it? It's time I've taught you a lesson. The stick whistled down and slapped hard against Henry's neck. No! I cried, grabbing the stick, but all I got for my efforts was a shove to the ground. Before I could get to my feet again, Henry was struck at least 2 more times. I made another attempt to take the stick, but George had stopped hitting Henry and was listening to something in the distance. A horse was coming up the road. A soldier. George dropped the stick but didn't let go of Henry. Dragging Henry with him, he went out to the road where he could be seen. Henry was doing all he could to escape, but no amount of kicking or complaining seemed to make any difference to George. The horsemen, upon seeing us, pulled to a stop. Captain Hargrove, they found Easton. "Oh, no," I said, the words slipping from my mouth before I could stop them. George turned to leer at me. "Sorry, Lisbette, it looks like you stayed up late for nothing." He shoved Henry toward me, and the prince fell stumbling into my arms. George turned back to the soldier. "Where did they find him?" "Hiding near the old church ruins." My heart gave a strange lurch. Even if Timothy had had time enough to reach the old church, which he hadn't, I had seen Timothy running in the direction of the river, not the old church. "Give me your horse," George ordered. The man dismounted and stepped away from the animal. As soon as George was on the horse, he asked the soldier, "Has Salts been alerted?" "No, sir." "He's been searching those woods," he said, nodding to Connor Hill. "Locate him and tell him what you've told me." "Yes, sir. And what of these two?" "Leave them. We don't need them any more." George burst into a gallop, trailing clouds of dust behind him. The soldier took off across the field towards the woods. Neither of them even bothered to glance back at Henry or me. "What do we do?" Henry asked. Even in the moonlight, I could see that his skin was pale. "I don't know," I said, "but I think they've made a mistake. I saw Timothy only 20 minutes ago, and he was heading the other direction, looking for you." "But then who did they find?" I shook my head. "I have no idea. Unless... Thomas. They've got Thomas, not Timothy." "But Thomas was at home when we left," Henry argued. "And what do you think happened when it was found out that you two were missing?" I said severely. "Every man in your house and mine is out there looking for you right now." As the truth of my words dawned on him, his face drooped in shame. Unable to speak, he shoved his hands into his pockets and turned his back towards me. Feeling sorry for him, I put my hands on his shoulder and said, "Don't worry. They'll figure out their mistake about Thomas soon enough. They won't hurt him once they see he's not Timothy." "This is all my uncle's fault," he said grimly. "When I get back to Ottleton, I'll see that they all pay for all that they've done." He paused. "If I get back to Ottleton." "Of course you'll get back." "Don't be so sure. We still haven't found the seal. If they find it first, then my uncle won't rest until I'm dead." "Henry, I have some good news for you." "What is it?" Before I could answer, the tinkling of bells sounded from within the church. Almost at the same time, the lightning rods in the churchyard began to hum. I turned to the west. Dark, heavy clouds were swallowing the pale stars. Grabbing Henry's hand, I said, "Come on, we have to get to the church." "No," he said, tugging me the other way, "to the vaults." Ignoring him, I yanked his arm and made him follow me. But as soon as we got to the church door, I found the door bolted tight. "Locked?" I cried. "It's never locked." The vicar, I realized, must have changed customs with all the soldiers roaming the countryside. Again, Henry started tugging on me. "The vaults. We'll be safe there." "No," I said, bracing myself against the church doors. "Those will be locked too." "All but one," he insisted. "That's how Trey and I got out." "Out of where?" "The house. It's the same way Timothy got in. There's a secret passage underground."